Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I am Clayton Spencer, and I'm a member of the board of Freeport Speech. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is a terrific turnout, and we so appreciate your support. I would like to thank our lead sponsors for our event this evening, the Dara Jean Kaufman Fund and Greg Boulos, as well as the growing community of supporters reflected on the screen whose interest and generosity make Freeport Speech possible. 2 housekeeping items. First, if you haven't already done so, please take a minute to turn off your phones. Second, immediately following tonight's panel, each of our speakers will be signing a book in the lobby where you came in. I encourage you to stop by. Tonight, we are invited into a conversation among 3 individuals who have spent their lives and careers immersed variously in making art, enjoying art, thinking and writing about art, and exploring the power of art to help us make sense of our lives and our worlds. They also happen to be 3 individuals who share a love of Maine. Like some of us here, they are from away, but each has chosen to put down roots in our fabulous state. Jeffrey Brown will serve as the moderator for tonight's discussion. He is well known to many of you. He's in 37 years with the PBS News Hour, he has served as a producer, a Washington anchor, and an on-camera reporter covering a range of national and international issues. He is currently a senior correspondent on the News Hour, and of special interest to us this evening, he is also the chief correspondent for arts, culture, and society. Jeffrey Brown is also a published poet whose collection of poetry called The News will be part of tonight's book signing. Our second guest this evening is Anthony Oliver Scott, known to his readers as A.O. Scott and to his friends as Tony. Beginning in 2000, he spent more than 23 years as a film critic for the New York Times. I commend to you his review of Ratatouille. But he has since returned to the world of books, where he started his career, becoming in 2023 critic at large at the New York Times Book Review. Not surprisingly, Tony Scott has spent a lot of time thinking about what criticism is and what it's for. Indeed, he has written a very smart and entertaining book on the subject called Better Living with Criticism, which will also be part of tonight's book signing. On his New York Times website, Tony explains how he thinks about his current role. I'm interested in the ways, he says, that writers, thinkers, and artists hold a mirror up to the world, and how their work illuminates the issues that bedevil our social and political life, often in unexpected ways. In a body of work centered on class, our third guest, Richard Russo, holds up just such a mirror. Russo, it seems, has long been tuned in to a question that has only recently come to dominate our discourse and our politics. What happens to people who are left behind by forces that create momentum and hope for others? The paradigmatic Russo novel, as I'm sure you know, is set in a fading northeastern mill town that time and trade have forgotten. The characters are vivid and their burdens are heavy and ever-present. Yet Russo's stories are a great read, well-paced, richly detailed, and funny, sometimes hysterically funny. It feels to me that humor in Russo's hands is almost never a cheap grab for comic relief, but rather one of the most powerful tools he uses to portray his characters in their full humanity. Russo approaches the individuals he writes about from a place of curiosity and respect. The result, as Tony Scott pointed out in his brilliant review of Empire Falls from 2001, and I note Empire Files is the one book set in a mill town in Maine, and guess which one of Russo's books won the Pulitzer Prize? We can all take pride in that. So Russo approaches his characters from a place of curiosity and respect. The result is, as Tony Scott points out in his brilliant review, this allows Russo to leave it to us, the readers, to, and here I'm quoting, intuit the scale of the story and its wider implications through the eyes and voices of the characters who drive the action. With that, let's welcome our panelists, our three tonight speakers, and I trust you know where you're sitting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, here's my first question. What if Tony had written a bad review of Rick's book? We would be having a very different discussion tonight, I think.
There would only be two of you.
Do
Two of you.
do you remember this, the review? Are you a reader of your...
I knew that Tony had reviewed one of my books. I had forgotten until tonight which one it was. I knew whether it was I knew it was around the Bridge of Sighs, Empire Falls, that period. But that, yeah.
You remember writing it?
I do remember writing it.
Yeah.
And I remember being very, very excited to get the assignment. It was actually the first cover that I ever had of the book review.
Oh,
Back
so
when that meant something. There used to be these print, things that you would read.
Yeah.
And that was the cover review. But it was. I mean, I remember just the challenge of it, because you have a big, complicated novel that you want to convey what's big and complicated and interesting about it, and not give too much away. And you have 12 or 1,500 words to do it, and that's there was a challenge in that, but it was great. It is, in spite of what people sometimes believe about criticism, the positive reviews are always more satisfying to write.
All right, well, I'm glad we have a positive connection. I just learned backstage, by the way, that they both play the guitar. I'm not bad on banging on the piano, so if there's a drummer out there, we have a band. You might get something you didn't expect. As we start, I just want to say thank you to Freeport Speech, Tom Salib, and everybody for inviting me and us to be here. And I assume hello to fellow shoppers at Bow Street Market. I had somebody come up to me, I was just telling somebody came up to me the other day in the market and said, just walked up staring and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, well, today it's between the salmon and the swordfish. I mean, anyway, I'm a part-timer here, here in Freeport and in Maine, but we do love being here. You've been here a long time.
Yep.
Are you a Mainer? I mean, I know I'm not. Are you a Mainer?
That's an interesting question. I think the answer is no. I love it. My wife and I have lived not only here, but in Waterville when I was teaching at Colby College, and we lived for many years in Camden. We've certainly lived longer here than any place else since we have been married. But all of that said, as much as we have loved our lives here and have such fond memories, because they come into segments. We were in various parts of the state, and our lives have been so enriched by the state of Maine. But I think my imagination didn't stray too far from where I was born. Mm-hmm. And that's where I still spend a lot of my imaginative life there. Interestingly, why did I set Empire Falls in Maine? It was because I needed a coast. I needed the father in that story, Max. I needed him to be painting somebody's windows shut up and down the coast. And I thought, well, I'll just set it in Maine, because my feeling was that I was going to be writing about the same issues: class, first and foremost,
Workers.
place, working people. It was going to be. That's what it just. The other books were in upstate New York or wherever, but this one was going to be set here because I needed a place for him to paint people's windows shut.
And Tony, you have, well, tell them, you've lived here you're a newcomer.
I'm a newcomer. I'm a Mainer in my dreams, is what I mean, which is literally true. I fall asleep and, I'm up in the woods or out on the water. I was a summer person for, about 25 years, and then graduated, got a license plate with a chickadee on it. So you won't get rid of me.
So we were given this extremely broad mandate tonight. I do a lot of this. So this seemed like the broadest thing I ever was told. It was basically life and art. But I chose that because Rick nicely has a new book out of essays called Life and Art. So we'll talk a little bit about life, and a little bit about art, and a little bit about life and art in these particular times, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to start with some sort of specifics to kind of introduce you guys and your work to the audience. Maybe, something as simple as, what are you reading right now?
What am I reading?
Yeah, and why?
I am reading a book of short stories by Laurie Ostlund, who I crossed paths with a number of years ago, and liked her work a lot. Saw that she had a new book coming out, and fortunately, my older daughter owns a bookstore. I always know where to go.
Yeah.
I'm reading those stories. My life is complicated by the fact that I would say, I don't know, maybe 70% of the books that I read are determined not by what I want to read at that moment, but by the books that are being sent to me.
Right.
I
think we're all in that world. Yeah.
Often with the idea of maybe an endorsement or something like that, and which is fine. I get introduced to a lot of new writers, and I get to see them before other people do, and that's a privilege. It's wonderful. The downside of that is, though, that because I am a writer of place and class, and especially left behind places, because I come from one of those, I have a certain identity out there in the world, and typically I get sent books that are about small towns, places left behind, class. I'm sent books that remind me of the one person I don't need to be reminded of. But that said, I do get to see a lot of interesting writers first, and my wife and I we are going to be heading actually for a few weeks in September here coming up to Martha's Vineyard, where we like to go after all the crazy people leave. And we bring with us books that we've been desperate to, me in particular, books that I've been desperate to read all year and just haven't been able to. A lot of them are guilty pleasures of some sort or other, ton of French. And that shouldn't even be a guilty, that's just pleasure. But So yeah, it's been a challenge for me to be able to read. Sometimes I just keep the books keep getting pushed.
How much of your reading life is tied to your work life? And
A lot of it is, but I have it's sort of it's different because I'm not one of the regular reviewers, and I'm kind of the old books guy, which is and sort of the old poems guy. So in contrast to my life when I was writing about movies, where I saw the new movies and had to sometimes fight to make time to see older movies that I liked or was interested in or wanted to catch up on. With the books, I have a lot of freedom to go back to explore, things that I hadn't read before, and also I have this kind of regular column, which is a digital presentation of a short poem and an analysis of that. So I spend a lot of time looking for short poems. So I spend a lot of my reading time in kind of small, concentrated doses of pleasure, going all the way back to the Elizabethans, through the Romantics, to modern and contemporary and living poets who I'm just discovering. So it's a very, it's in a way very
realize,
scattered.
as you say that, how crazy that sounds? Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. This is a man who's working in the Daily News, as am I, right? So, I mean, and we'll talk a little bit about how the changes in our world means the Daily News isn't what it used to be. But you're talking about Elizabethan poetry working for the New York Times.
Yes, this has been, I have to say, I mean, the great kind of surprise of my recent career. It was not, it may shock you to learn, there was not an editorial meeting of the sort of top editors of the New York Times who decided, what do we need, in this digital age when we need to get, our goal of 25 million subscribers by 2020. So we need more poetry. I don't think anyone said, well, what we need, we need more dead poets in the news. But what happened was, I started doing these pieces with a very talented group of designers and digital producers, just sort of for fun. I mean, we thought, well, what if we did something? What if we did a poem and took a short poem and kind of did a sort of a quick, close read of it. And what happened was, it turned out that was actually what people wanted to read. And the response, both in terms of traffic, but also in terms of the intensity and enthusiasm of what we heard from readers, was extraordinary. And we decided, well, we better keep doing this. And so it turned into this very unlikely kind of little franchise. So the idea is you're scrolling through all the horrible stuff at the top of the New York Times homepage, and then you get to a little, your relief or your reward or your respite is a poem.
What did this do for you psychically? I mean, getting to have this second career almost in a very unexpected way.
Yeah, well, it's been. I mean, I've always been a reader of poetry, and I think the only less promising career than being a writer of poetry may be a reader of poetry. So, and when I went over to the book review, I thought, well, I'd like to do something. I just like, in the middle of everything else that they're going to want me to do, I'd love to do something involving poetry every now and then. And they were, editors were fine with that, but it did sort of come. I mean, it felt like in some ways I'd been waiting for years and years for this to happen, but never expecting anything like it would happen. So it's been, and it has psychically. It means that I have to spend a certain amount of my working time just like reading Seamus Heaney and Emily Dickinson, and just sort of going through the Poetry Foundation archives or the books that have accumulated on my shelves, finding just the right one to share with the readers. The next one is being published, I think, tonight, and I've been spending, I spent a lot of the last month or so reading Robert Frost, which is, not a bad thing to do during the summer in New England.
Yeah.
So.
The finding the right one is, I mean, in my own experience, we started presenting poetry a long time ago as part of our arts coverage. And it's rather an extraordinary thing to do that in a nightly television news context.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell is poetry doing?
Right.
Even if we have an hour, why would you spend 5 or 10 minutes of it on poetry? And in early days, we would get letters, in the days of letters to the editor or letters sent online, of the sort, I don't watch the news to get poetry. Why are you telling me about Seamus Heaney instead of what happened in Ireland, like to their government, for example? And so the trick for me really was, how do you, it wasn't hard for me to make a case for it myself, but how do you make a case for it to the audience? Some people, naturally, they love poetry, that's fine. But most people they're curious. They don't quite get it. What's the tie between poets and what we're trying to do in a news context?
Do you think that that these people have been, that something has short-circuited in them as a result of high school English teachers or something?
Well, I think, of course, there's a lot yeah.
It's so often taught badly, through the wrong end of the telescope, as if you're starting with a message,
right,
or something like that. It's not, and so the pleasure, if that's the kind of education you've gotten through high school, that's gonna.
Yes,
it's going to stick around. It's going to stick with you for a while.
I mean, if it's homework, if it's work.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I think that the way not to make the case, and we think about this a lot, is, to tell somebody how important it is, to say, well, no, you really need to read poetry because it's, this is good for you. And if you're a serious person and a smart person and a cultured person, you will do this. And that is just completely alienating. I mean, who wants that? And so, in a way, we've been very careful not to sort of make the case in that general way, not even to talk about poetry. We need to read poetry, but it's just like, here's a poem, just here's something. It's like you could tell somebody about how wonderful a certain kind of food is and how they should try it and they should, have a sophisticated palate and eat it, or you could just give them a bite. And that might work better if you present it and prepare it well.
I mean, there's a broader issue here, and I'd like your reaction from both of you. When I think about in the context of the news, whether art or poetry, is what is our expectation of how we learn about our world? If you're turning on a news program or you're opening up the New York Times, you expect to hear about what's happening in, right now, Gaza or Ukraine or Washington, D.C., troops in streets and things like that. And we all understand that as news. And we all understand who newsmakers are in a traditional sense. But is a poet a newsmaker? To me, that was fairly obvious early on, personally, but not as a news person. We had to grope a long time with how do you make that part of the news, that the way one would think of a politician or a general or a CEO or whatever as a newsmaker, we all get that, but is a novelist a cultural newsmaker? Is Richard Russo's novel, it's obviously telling me something about the world, right?
Yeah, I would say of the arts in general, that poets, writers, they must be newsmakers. They're the first ones who are rounded up. They're the first ones who are rounded up in fascist regimes.
You're smiling, but
but no, these are people who present some facet of the world, often in an entertaining way. But these are voices, yeah, there are people who are afraid of voices.
I think that's right, and I think there are, not only governments, but other forces in our society, in our culture who find it in their interest to push people away from the kinds of challenges, the kinds of news that literature in particular, that writers bring, and I think that it is partly the job of writers, not necessarily as a job. I don't know, how it works with you, but I don't think, you necessarily sit down and say, well, I'm going to explain this about the world to my readers.
I would have to understand it myself first.
Right, but I think that's the key.
Yeah.
That it's your attempt to understand it. It's your starting not from any kind of set of arguments or preconceptions or lessons that you want to teach, but a set of questions that you have about people and about places and about their relationships and about the world. And the process of your investigating that is what's interesting and valuable to your readers, I think.
Well, in my case, one of the greatest gifts that I was given was from the gifts from my mother and father, who agreed about nothing, really. But what they were arguing about, and the reason that I think was at the root cause of the fact that their marriage was destined to fail, was that after the war, when my father came home, a bona fide war hero, after the war, fundamentally they disagreed about America. My father believed that America hadn't changed really at all.
After Depression, after a war.
He felt that he was probably still playing against a stacked deck in America, that was the way he negotiated his life. He was always reminding me when I was optimistic about anything that my name would always end with a vowel. And he didn't believe that at the end of the Second World War that America was going to open up to people like him. My mother, on the other hand, believed that everything was going to change, that everything was changing right before her eyes, that America was going to offer people like her and me the kinds of things that had never been offered to people like us before, and to a large extent, she was right. I benefited from those generous government-backed student loans. When I went off to college, I had all sorts of. I had all sorts of advantages when I graduated from. When I finished my graduate work, as a result of all those loans and some scholarships that I got and some other kinds of work that I'd done, I had a grand total of $8,000 in debt. So my mother was right about America, but my father was also right in his own way too. And the gift that I got from them, because they were arguing about America, was the kind of question that I've spent, that I can't get to the bottom. I don't want to get to the bottom of it. I've been writing about this now for close to 40 years, and that's the good news, is that you look for the thing that you can't get to the bottom of somehow.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about origin stories here a little bit, and this story you're telling, you write in that wonderful essay, marriage story.
Yeah.
But as you sit here now, then, if you're thinking about origins and thinking about your parents and where you grew up and how you grew up, does the fact that you're a writer, does that seem obvious that would have be what you did?
No, quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. No, I think if I had a chance to live, well, obviously I've lived this life. If I had 99 more chances, I don't see any of them turning out like this one did. So no, I don't think it was. I think I did have those advantages and those gifts, but no, I don't think that there was anything predestined about it at all. I think if my mother were here, she would on the one hand crow. She would be proud of many of the things that I have done. But the life I'm living wasn't the one that the life I'm living isn't the one she planned for me. Wasn't the one she wanted for me. She wanted a clean getaway, and she didn't, and we didn't get that. I ended up, going someplace with her. Becoming a college professor, which is what she wanted me to do.
But you are saying that that life gave you a subject.
Yes, and that's where she would have been disappointed, because of course, she, as I've said, it's a funny line, but there's a lot of truth to it too. Is that for my mother, education, my going away and becoming educated was like entering the witness protection program. Who in the world enters the witness protection program and then after graduating announces to the whole world who you are? Who does that? that's crazy. But of course, that's what my books have done. Yeah. You know, I've told the world who I am, where I came from, so yeah, the battle continues.
What's your origin story for, you were telling us about what you're doing, how you came to the poetry side,
Yeah.
but...
Well, it was, I think, like any journalistic career, or like most of them, it was a series of accidents and bad decisions by other people, you know, or at least inexplicable ones, you know. And I had, I mean, in some ways, it's a very contrasting story. I mean, I grew up, the only people I knew, the only adults I knew growing up were college professors. The only thing that I could imagine doing, in a way, was that. That's what both my parents did, all of their friends, and within a very kind of narrow frame. So they were both professors of history, and
really?
Sometimes someone would come over who was a sociologist or an anthropologist, and that was, you know, so that was diversity.
That's right.
But so I grew up and I was very bookish, but also interested in, you know, in popular music and movies, and also in a way in criticism. That is, in sort of reading stuff about what I was interested in, and so I read, you know, I had a subscription to Rolling Stone, and I read all the rock critics in the 70s and 80s when I was a kid, and just the sort of, I was very excited by the idea of, and just the atmosphere of kind of arguing about things, that you would, it's not just that like you would like something or, but you needed to argue about it. You needed to hate something too.
Oh,
you know?
that's so interesting.
Right, yeah.
You had to have, yes, you had to have some, you know, you had to have a musician or a band or a genre that was yours, and that you defined it by what you were against.
Yeah.
And which is kind of what criticism in a certain way is. But so but I went to college, and when I graduated, I didn't know what, I mean, I sort of knew, yeah, it would be great to be a writer, to write for magazines and newspapers, to sort of follow that kind of journalistic or you know, more public career, but I didn't know how to do it. You know, I didn't know anyone who had ever done it. So I went to graduate school to sort of follow on the track that I knew, and for a while that was fine because I was always good at school, and I read a lot of books that I might not have read otherwise, and learned some good skills. But I was also pretty miserable and not really enchanted by the prospect of going on and being a college professor. So I started writing reviews really just on the side, you know, just to get something, to have the feeling of writing something that I could finish, that somebody might read, and that also I remember, the first $125 check I got for a book review was a watershed in my life.
Yeah.
Like, you could do this. This could be this is a thing that you could do in the world. And so I went to the first editor that I ever wrote for was John Leonard, who had been the book review editor at the Times, great critic, was on TV on CBS Sunday Morning all the time, and he was literary editor at The Nation. He and his wife were, and they published the first couple things that I wrote, first couple of reviews, and I went in to his office after that, and I said, I want to do this, and he said, you can't do this. No one can do this. This is no way to make a living. It doesn't exist. And I took that as encouragement.
Financially, he was
just like there's no
He wasn't telling you can't.
No, he wasn't saying I couldn't do it. He was saying it
can't be done.
It can't be done. But I thought, well, but you do it. You do it, John Leonard. So I took that though as encouragement. It was the classic thing where you hear the opposite of what the person is saying. So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah. But we talked about this when your book came out, because your book you were still sort of making an argument for what the purpose of criticism is, right?
Yeah.
What is the purpose? I mean, what have you come to? How do you think about it?
I mean, I don't know. I wrote the whole book to figure it out, and I'm not sure that I did.
Well, tell us what your current thinking is.
But my current thinking, my thinking then and my thinking now is that I was less interested in criticism as a job, as a profession, as a kind of a type of journalism or an intellectual discipline, as an activity that is part of all of our experiences of creativity in the arts. That's sort of conjoined to creativity. That is, we have this impulse, I think, as a species, to make things, to create representations, to create beautiful things, to tell stories that tried to make sense of our situation in the world, to entertain each other. We have that creative impulse, and right alongside it is the impulse to, or the urge to, or the need to judge, evaluate, interpret, compare, argue about those same things. So I think it goes back. I imagine this people drawing on the walls of caves, and someone drew two people drew a buffalo on the walls of the cave, and someone was like, well, that one's a little better. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, that children do that. I mean, it's part of who we are. So I was trying to think about, where does that come from? What does that? Why do we do that? Why is it important? Why is it even annoying as it can be? And certainly, as a critic, a professional critic for 30 years, I know just how annoying everybody thinks it can be. But nonetheless, its value is linked to the value of art. It's part of how we process and experience and understand that value.
Is it also making a case for the role of art in our society? I mean, are you thinking that? Yes.
Yes, I think criticism in and of itself testifies to the importance of a work of art, just because, or of an art form, because somebody bothered to do it. Somebody, sat down and wrote something, or sat down and made an argument, or said something about it. And that act in itself is taking something seriously, showing it respect, saying that it has value.
Yeah.
And without criticism, I do think the arts become weaker, become flabbier. And the sense of their value to us as a community and as a society and individuals starts to maybe get a little shaky.
Well, the artist feels like he or she is being, number one, being paid attention to, but also being looked at very, very carefully. Mm-hmm. And it always seems to me that one of the things that art really, again, is going back to the cave walls probably, but the one thing that art always from the beginning has demanded of us is to go slow. Mm-hmm. Slow down, stop, look, pay attention, look carefully. And so that's part of what the critic does, in addition to making arguments, as you've pointed out, is to encourage that thing that art cannot exist without, and that's just slowing down.
Yes. Yeah.
By the way, speaking of caves, have you noticed how Neanderthals have made a big comeback? And speaking of criticism. No, I don't mean it the way.
You mean?
No, you're taking this all wrong.
You mean actual Neanderthals?
I mean the actual Neanderthals were smarter and more creative than we give them credit for. I'm not talking about today's Neanderthals. I know. No, we can go there later. But no, I'm actually tying this to criticism because I guess our scientific understanding of paleontology and suggested that the Neanderthals were, not the smart ones, right? Mm-hmm. But the more they do these findings, they find they were very creative. They made works of art. Mm-hmm. They were child bearers. Okay, maybe I'm going down a path here. I couldn't resist with the caves. Yeah. But while we're talking about biography, mm-hmm. I cannot resist asking you to tell them the story you told us backstage about what happened to you this summer. Because this is a rather extraordinary in the life of a novelist who's been around the block a few times with a bunch of novels, right?
Yeah.
And then, well, you tell them.
Well, how to pare this story down a little bit here. I got a call from my editor at Knopf saying that because my book, Life and Art, was coming out, that someone from Publishers Weekly wanted to talk to me about the book. And so they arranged for a phone call. Phone rang, and I picked it up, and there was a voice who said, "Okay, you're going to be on with the caller here in just a minute. Hang on." And so I did. I waited, and then there's a voice. There's a voice talking to me. It's a woman's voice. She's talking to me, and for some reason she's talking about Bridge of Sighs. And I thought,
which is about 20 years.
It's a 20, yeah, almost 2 decades old novel of mine. She keeps talking about Bridge of Sighs, Bridge of Sighs, Bridge of Sighs. And I'm thinking, God, what can I do to get her off the subject of this? I'm talking with somebody from Publishers Weekly about a new book coming out, and this woman just will not get off the subject of Bridge of Sighs. And we had maybe 20-minute conversation. And so she's ready to sign off, and I said to her, "This has been fun. I've enjoyed talking with you about the book. I'm glad you like it." I said, "But I'm sorry, I missed the introduction when the call went through. You said I was going to be talking with someone, but I didn't catch your name." And there was a beat of silence, and the woman's voice said, "Oprah?" And then there was another beat of silence because several things are going through my head at the same time. One is, am I being punked here? Another is, but that can't be. Why would my editor be involved in something like that? And then the other is, could there be more than one Oprah? So all of this is going through my head. So she said Oprah, and then there was this beat of silence, and then another beat of silence, and she said, "Winfrey?" So, and we've had fun with that since, because she didn't understand. She thought that I had heard the introduction, but something went wrong with the guy who was setting up the call. He just didn't tell me. And Oprah is very careful about this because it's always a surprise. She will not tell anyone in advance It always happens this way. You get a call, and it's always a secret. You're always supposed to be talking to somebody else because she wants to be the one who tells you that she has selected your novel. So, but anyway, I mean, it got weirder and weirder because then after that, I get a call. I mean, I'm now on a very small regional book tour for Life and Art. I'm going New England. I think the farthest south I went was New York City. Except I was sent to Seattle. And my daughters, one of whom is a writer and the other is a bookstore owner, was looking at me saying, "What in the world are you going to Seattle for?" And it was because that's where Oprah does her show. But I've also, in order to do this, I've had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, right? That I won't say anything. I especially can't say anything to my daughters because they're both in the business. But this is not adding up. Why in the world are they sending Dad to Seattle, of all places, and then I come back and I won't tell them why? So anyway, this went on like this for 2 months between the time that I was told and the time that it became public.
It's amazing. Yeah. But I mean, you've had a lot of experience with, must have been surprising moments of your books being made into movies and, meeting a lot of amazing people because of that. But this must be up there to take a 20-year-old novel and suddenly, because usually she's picking new books.
Yeah, books that'll be out about the same time that the award is announced. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was, I mean, Oprah and I didn't actually talk about this. We had a lovely conversation, and it turned out we had a fair number of things in common. She told me that one of the things that she liked about Bridge of Sighs was that it had, a lot of it was about this store. The store in Bridge of Sighs is called Ike Lubin's, but it turned out that her parents also had a store. And we talked about that, how different our lives would have been if I'd stuck around where I was in Gloversville, if she had stuck around where she was, where she grew up. And so we talked about a fair number of things that we had in common. The one thing that we didn't talk about, and I'm not exactly sure why, the one thing that we didn't talk about is that Bridge of Sighs, of all of my novels, perhaps because the canvas is so broad, there's so many characters, and the time goes from when Bobby and Lucy are just kids until they're both old men or older men. So there's an enormous amount of time. The space is fairly constricted, but there's an enormous amount of time, a huge cast of characters. But one of the things that, as a result of that, one of the things that book did because of how big it was, is that it took the things that I'm usually interested in, which is place and class, and the book was big enough in terms of scope for me to include race in a way that I had not done in my other books. I didn't really talk about that with Oprah. I don't know if it was part of her thinking at all. But it is the book of all of my novels that really has race as close to the center of the story as place and class are.
So I want to talk now, bring this up to our moment, I guess, cultural and political moment. And by the way, we'll save about 15 minutes or so at the end for questions, so do think about questions you might have. I was, sort of looking at this again. This is what you were all given. The many ways in which art and literature impact our lives. This has been much on my mind of late. It's almost like a given, the intersection of art and literature with life. And I wonder how much that's true anymore. I wonder how much these things there are clefts in our culture and in our politics now that sounds like such a nice thing to say, the intersection of art and literature with life, right? We all know that. But do we anymore? Technology's changed, changes the world of criticism, attention spans change.
Well, it
We
has.
talk a lot about education and reading and who's reading books, the lack of reading books. So I wonder if you're both thinking about that. Like, Tony, where does literature even enter our lives nowadays? Never mind impact them.
Right. No, I think about this a lot, and I'm very unresolved or conflicted in my thinking, because on the one hand, I do think that the optimist in me thinks that, as we were saying before, that human creativity, the urge to create is innate and in a way I think indestructible. That is, people will find ways to express themselves. People will seek out beauty and aesthetic experiences and ways of engaging and satisfying their curiosity in any kind of circumstances. And I think this has been true throughout history. In the very worst moments, in the very grimmest circumstances, people have found that. People have made things, and people have appreciated what's been made. So part of me thinks, technology changes, society changes, economies change, the media, that creative work gets done in change, but nonetheless, that essential impulse remains and is strong enough at least to survive from one generation to the next. On the other hand, the challenges that it faces and the forces that exist, with the interest of kind of suppressing it or marginalizing it or cheapening it, are very, very strong.
Yeah.
And are getting stronger and finding kind of new ways. So I don't know what to think about, for example, AI, which is the thing that everyone is talking about, the sort of great focus of increasingly of anxiety and sometimes a little bit of optimism or hope, or at least kind of hype currently. But if we have I don't know how to think about a situation where all of the reading and writing is being done by robots talking to each other. Mm-hmm. I don't know what happens to sort of the intersection of art and life, where that's, it's not art and it's not life. It's just something, what do they call it? Slop.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways it's very important for people who do the kinds of things that we do, and especially younger people who have interests of the kinds that we have to figure out how, not just to sort of to pursue their own careers or interests, but to defend, some of the values that we've been talking about of art, of truth-telling, of creativity. And I
mean, not just do it, but also defend it.
Not just do it, but think about, the value of it, defend the value of it, assert the value of it in some kind of way, make room for it. Mm-hmm. You talked about attention, and I think that's a very important thing. Figure out what you're going to pay attention to, and how you're going to pay attention, because your attention is now the great commodity. It's now the sort of the great economic force or the currency in our lives. It's being our attention is being bought and sold and traded and leveraged and commodified in all kinds of different ways that we have to figure out how to protect it, how to protect its value, and how to make sure that it's pointed in some worthwhile direction. I can say that all in the abstract. I don't know if I can say what that really means in practice.
Well, just to make it more concrete, there's so much in what you just said, but if you take the economics or the technology, and just to make it a little more concrete, because you were talking about your world of criticism, is there a crisis of criticism today? Is that the right word? You look even at your own paper, changes there, book reviews are gone in many places.
I think that there is, the thing that worries me is a transition, and this has been happening for a while, and I wrote about it in the book, but it was at a much earlier kind of stage of development, which is the sort of the rise of the algorithm, and the idea of the most important thing to do, or the most important response to have to any book or piece of music or movie or television show is to like it. And so we're just all going to like things, and everybody's going to like what they like, and the algorithm is going to say, well, you like this, you'll also like that. People who like this also like that. And you'll, thumbs up, thumbs down. And there's an attempt, I think, within the general media to take back some of the power of the algorithm by duplicating it, by saying, well, we're going to give you a recommendation engine. We're going to tell you, what you might like, which is a fine consumer service, and I'm not against it, and I'm in favor of people liking things. But I would also say that there is more to a kind of a genuine appreciation of or engagement with human creativity, with art, if you like, than just liking or not liking it. I mean, some of the books and movies and pieces of music that have had the most impact on me in my life and have changed the way I've thought about things are things I can't stand, are horrible, but are important. You have to be able to risk that, and you have to be able to have a way of having your attention directed not just toward what somebody or some machine or some application thinks it should be directed toward.
Well, how many times have we all had the experience of trying to decide what to read or what to watch on any given night? And you get into bed and you think, oh, I'm ready to read something new, or I'm ready to do something new. And then you start scrolling through all of the things that people are recommending to you.
Right.
At the end of about 45 minutes, you yawn and turn out the light.
Yeah. Or you just go watch an episode of The Simpsons.
Yeah.
That you've already seen 40 times.
Yeah, but that again too goes back to what art has always demanded of us. It demands of us that we go slow, and it demands silence. But we live in the noisiest world imaginable. It's just, it's impossible, the volume at which artists, all of us, are working. And I think I'm more worried about younger artists. I mean, I made my reputation before the internet, for God's sake. But for young writers, one of my younger daughter is a writer. But for almost all young artists, the thing that is demanded of you, if you're a writer or in almost any kind of artist, the thing that is demanded of you by your publicist or your agent or whoever is that you live right in the midst of the noise.
Right.
You have to be on social media. You have to be putting yourself out there always. Those two things are antithetical, aren't they? The noise and especially for younger artists coming along to have to live in that kind of noise and still produce work that is antithetical to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And because to do that work demands not only the sort of time and attention and absorption and care, and as you say, slowness. That's such an important idea, but also a kind of wandering. That you may find what influences you or inspires you. Off some beaten track somewhere. And if you're always on the internet, you won't be out in the world or out in the used bookstore finding the thing that's sort of buried at the bottom of the pile.
Right.
But nobody is telling you, that isn't there on the algorithms, that no one is recommending to you, but that could be the thing that cracks something open.
That's such a good point about wandering. People think about your mind, when you say that your mind wanders, you assume that that's a bad thing. Right. If you're an artist, that's not a bad thing at all. That's your mind trying to figure out a connection between two unlike things. Right. And if your mind doesn't wander, you're never going to make that connection if your mind doesn't wander.
And the noise that you're talking about is also an attempt to direct your attention at every moment. Yeah. If you're in the online world, it's managing your attention. You may feel like your mind is wandering because you can't pay attention to anything for a minute, and you wonder how did I get onto this site? I came here. I wanted to I wanted to order something. I wanted to order a bottle of aspirin, and now I'm here booking a flight to,
Yeah.
to Santiago. How did that
All right, but
happen?
while we're piling on negatives, I mean, one of the results, when I was going through the list of changes recently, and I said the word education, and you said, that's for sure. We read constantly now that college kids are not given a whole book to read, right? Because they don't have the attention span. Or, I mean, not everywhere, obviously, but in many cases. And that they can only read certain chunks of a text. The other day, there was yet another unsurprising survey about how reading for pleasure has gone down yet again. And I guess the only news there was how precipitously that's happened. So in that world, whether it's you as a veteran or your daughter as a still, how does one write? Why does one write? Who are you writing for at this point?
Well, on my last book tour, I crossed paths with my friend Dan Patchett from Nashville, and we came up with a mantra. This was just a few years ago, and we decided that we would remind ourselves every day that if it mattered before, it still does. If it doesn't now, it never did. And we would tell ourselves to say this every morning, because every morning when we wake up and we see the world around us, some of them, the changes that we've all been talking about, plus of course the world of politics. I think it is hard for artists these days, and I confess that there are times that I think, what am I doing spinning stories right now? It's what I've done my entire life. I know it's what I'm good at. But again, who am I doing this for? But I do believe that if it mattered before, it still does. If it doesn't now, it never did.
So which is it?
Yeah, well, I think.
I mean, it's a nice mantra. But you're leaving us with.
I think it does, and I think that the worse the situation that you're in, the more these things matter, not the less they matter. Although it's easier, it's easy to become discouraged. Yeah. But I do think that the worse the circumstance, the more important it is for art to exist. Whether it will or not, I have no more idea of that than anybody else. It just seems to me it's more important now than it was a decade ago, at least in part because of the threats we face. Yeah.
And you were talking about the subject, your great subject of working class America, of divisions, of economic inequality, very much still with us, political divisions. Yep. Does your thinking about writing, and I don't know where this book of essays, whether that came from our times or whatever you're thinking about writing next, does it change whether that's the urgency or the subject or even the way you think of the responsibility you have as a writer now? Does it change now?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. If it's changed, it's changed in this way. My wife Barbara does volunteer work at a wonderful organization here in Maine that many of you probably know, an organization called Maine Needs, and I think the work that they do is wonderful in its own right, but I think it also has a political aspect to it, because here are a group of people, nobody asks them about their politics or anything like that, but here are a group of people who are interested in providing people, some of them who have absolutely nothing, with the bare essentials that are necessary. This week, a lot of it was getting backpacks to kids who are about to go back to school, and thinking for a moment about the humiliation that would be caused by a kid having to go back to school without a backpack when all the other kids in school have backpacks. Now, to get back to the point that you were making, asking me whether this has changed anything, is that I think that if there's a way out of this morass that we're in, it's got to be something like that, where whatever names we're hurling at each other in terms of politics and everything else, the way out of all of this is at a kind of granular level where we're really paying as close attention as we can to our neighbors and trying to find some way. So for me, what I want in the next few years, I am 76 now. What I want for the next few years is for my own work to hew a little closer to the needs aspect of things, because I think those two things are going to work in conjunction. The art, I couldn't give up writing because I'm just a natural bullshitter, as you can all tell. So I'm always going to do that. I'm never going to. I couldn't anymore stop writing than I could stop breathing. So that's always going to be it. It's always going to be part of my life, and it's going to be an important part of it. But I'm trying. I'm trying to adjust, if possible, to adjust my thinking a little bit, so that I can pay a little bit more attention to things where I thought my whole job was to bullshit. Now I'm thinking maybe only part of my job is to bullshit.
What about for you? I mean, Tony, I can't help but think like the front page, to the extent there's still a front page of your paper, is telling us about the threats to democracy, threats to this country.
Well,
and you're doing poetry.
Well, yes.
Now, I don't mean that I wrestle with this myself. So.
Well, I think, one thing that has encouraged me in doing the poetry and has made me think that it has some value in the context that we're talking about is precisely the number of readers I hear from who come to the newspaper and are just, bathed in pessimism and horror and a sense of kind of the world coming apart, and people just at each other's throats. And, the cliche word is polarization. I'm not sure that even covers it. No. But that there is something that is not all that human beings are. That is not all that we can do, and it's not all that we have in common. And I think I talked before about the poem, the poetry read as a kind of oasis or respite or pause. The only way I think that we can individually or collectively get through whatever it is we're going through and survive it is if we hold on to precisely those values that can't be taken over by ideology, by politics. There's a great effort to politicize everything, yes. to take every kind of every increment of taste or belief and turn it into a political weapon. And I think that does a terrible disservice to what art and culture, and in particular what American art and culture have been, which has been this amazing thing we have in common. Mm-hmm. I play a lot of old time music. I play country and western music and rhythm and blues and gospel and jug band music in various sort of side gigs that I have up here. And that music, has emerged out of a world that was no less polarized and sometimes much more violently polarized than what we have now, but is something that that we do have in common. Yeah. And in some of the places that I play music are among the most politically diverse spaces that I've ever been in. At American Legion Hall, up in Camden, where there's an open mic night. and it's the purplest place that I've ever been. But people all like the music. You know, people when someone plays a Merle Haggard song or a Bob Dylan song, you know, or a Sister Rosetta Tharpe song or whatever it is, that has some kind of value, that makes some kind of link between people that I have to believe is in some way stronger than, and I think more important and maybe more sustaining than whatever else is going on. That's important. I mean, politics is important. People's political beliefs mean a great deal to them and are important parts of their lives. But there's also something else. There are other values that we have. And there are other things that we make and do and think about that have value. And I think of my own job as trying to think about those and talk about those and preserve some space in which that kind of sharing can happen.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. All right, we have about 10 minutes left, and perhaps there are some questions. And if there are, I would just ask that you keep them fairly brief and keep them as questions.
Hi there. Thank you so much for being here. I was a little disheartened with the early comments about education. I've had the great fortune to serve on our local school board for a while. And I know that and I am a parent to a high school English teacher, and I know that
Yeah, I did that too.
And I don't think you meant it, but I want to give you a chance to end on a really hopeful note, because I also spend my life now with artists, and many of them are very young. And like you, artists are compelled to slow down and make art without regard, I believe, the best artists, without regard for the audience necessarily, or the commerce of it. And it's the commerce and the politicization that I feel is really what's making things troubling for us. But I find so much hope in the young people and the art, all the arts that are still happening, the new bohemians, I'm calling them, the new bohemians. I'd like to hear from you, and I think Tony just touched on it so beautifully, talking about music. What's giving you hope? Because whenever I encounter an artist who says, "Oh, what's the point?" I say, "You're the point. Like, we need you more than ever. Please stop scrolling and worrying that your art is not important. We need you." So what are you looking to that gives you hope?
I mean,
Good question. Go ahead.
Gosh, it seems like we just kind of dealt with that a little bit. Let me put it this way. I am a congenital optimist. That optimism continues to be tested. But I think art is essentially optimistic. Now, my particular art, I think of myself, I mean, I write a lot of different things, but I think of myself as a novelist. A lot of my books are doorstops, admittedly. And often they take me 4 or 5 years to write, or they used to back when I was when I had more obligations in the classroom and as a parent. But I am and continue to be a congenital optimist. And if you're going to write books as long as mine, they're going to take you 3, 4, 5 years to write. Who in the world would go on a journey that's going to take you 3 or 4 or 5 years with no guarantee that anything is going to come of it? There are so many ways to ruin a novel. You just can't. You have to write several of them before you have any idea how many ways there are to screw up a book. And if you manage not to do that, it's wonderful. But you have to be full of hope to even start, because I mean, you could go to law school in the time that it takes, me at least, to write a book. Who would do that? Who would do that without hope?
I think you answered the question perfectly. I think that the fact that there are people, young people, I mean, I think of my own daughter, who's a painter, and who paints, who wakes up in the morning, not to sell paintings, but to figure out, how to paint, how to put some of what she understands and perceives about the world into this form. And I absolutely agree that you can't do that from a standpoint of despair or resignation. And also, I mean, I would say you also can't be a teacher from a standpoint of despair or resignation. That is intrinsically, I happen to be married to a teacher, but it's an intrinsically an act of hope. It's putting a stake into the future. It's not, it's certainly not a lucrative or glamorous way to make a living. No one ever went into it for that reason, but it requires, just as I think making art requires, that kind of faith that whatever, however bad the sort of the general circumstances will be, there can be at some local level of practice, in a classroom or just one-on-one, with a child, or between an artist and her medium, some kind of progress towards some achievable goal.
I appreciate the question too. I mean, I didn't want to lead this and leave us in despair, even though there's plenty of reason for it, but I don't think any of us would do what we do if we didn't feel, the not only hope, but a belief in the value of this. And I'll just tell you, because I see it all the time, especially at the local level. Just last week, I was doing a story in New Hampshire, our neighbor, where there's been a lot of cuts by the State Art Council. We're now hearing a lot about cuts at the federal level with the NEA, but some states are also cutting back in big ways. New Hampshire, very drastically. But I went to 3 or 4 different local arts institutions, barn house play, a barn theater, a performing arts center for young kids to all ages, a chamber music on an old farm. The people I met, I mean, I just, on my drive back, I was in my role, I guess, as the New England correspondent for the News Hour. I got to drive back to Maine. It was great. But on the drive back, I was just thinking, these people, they were, if I say nice people, I don't mean it in a banal way. I mean, they were real people. They cared so much about what they were doing with their small arts organizations. I think sometimes we get caught up in this national drama or international drama. I know I do. I have to attend a morning meeting every day, and there's, it's a disaster pile up. But what I see all the time at the local level are specific people who care about what they're doing, and they're creating art, and they're working with young people, and they're building a future. That has to be the hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, one more question? Okay.
A couple of weeks ago, I spent a day with a friend of mine whose father was the Speaker of the House back in 1988, Jim Wright from Texas. And I asked her this one specific question, what she thought of it. And that was what she thought of the Melania-Trump concert hall and the fact that Trump had made himself chairman of the Kennedy Center. And what historically would her father have thought of that? And where do you think this thing would end up as far as the history of what the Kennedy Center has stood for all these years?
Well, nothing good.
Well, I think I think about what Jeff was just saying, which is that, and just sort of extrapolating it a little further, that we have in this country for many years been, very fortunate in having a kind of robust support, not only government support, but a robust cultural sphere that's been very well funded, relatively, not as well as maybe other places, but where work has been able to be done in and appreciated in what seem now already to be fairly, plush and luxurious circumstances. But I think what we need to think about now, in a way, is where does this creativity come from? I mean, you're talking about at the local level. I mean, somebody, it has to be the case that people will, get together, put on a show, put on a concert, play some music. I mean, I think that in some ways, if the arts are going to survive and going to flourish, it may have to be at a different scale and at a different level and in different places than where we're used to seeing it happen. Because the places where we're used to seeing it happen may not be as healthy, may be corrupted in various ways, may be defunded, may be shut down. So if this is going to survive, it's sort of on all of us as people who believe in small d democracy and people who care about art and creativity and all the values that we've been talking about here, to figure out where we are, how to preserve and promote and sustain those.
Okay, that's a good place to leave things. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.